I remember very early on in my channel, I made a video on my nursing school journey, talking about the classes I took and the whole experience that nursing school gave me when it came to the courses I was taking and the level of difficulty they were. So I kind of wanted to expand on that and kind of just share my overall undergraduate studies since I started college, all the way back in 2018, which was 7 years ago. So it's quite a long time. I want to share my grades and just kind of tell you generally about how I felt taking those courses. And it's something that a lot of students actually don't do. They keep their grades very private. But I just want to give people some context in the sense that I'm not a perfect student. I didn't get the best grades in many of the classes, and I'm still in a very good position right now. And it's a very vulnerable thing to do when it comes to sharing grades. And I understand that some of these grades might kind of shock you, and I just want to kind of go and explain it. So what I did is I ended up putting all my grades and all the classes I took on a document, and I just want to go through those one by one to share with you my experience and how I like the class. Even for classes that I may have not gotten good grades in, I still learned a lot of valuable information, and that might not be the case with classes I got a really good grade in that I particularly did not enjoy. So without further ado, I'll be more than happy to share with you my grades, and then after that, I will kind of tell you more about how these grades reflect me as a person and how I can learn from these grades. So this was my very first semester of college right out of high school. I went to high school in Cary High, and these were the first semester classes I took. I remember when I was meeting with my advisor at this college, particularly, this is Wake Tech, she told me not to throw a bunch of classes on my first semester because it might overwhelm me and I may not do well. Well, obviously, I didn't take her advice, and I did fairly well. The first semester, I took basically all the core requisites in my associate's degree, which at that time was an associate in science. And in terms of these classes, I don't think any of these were particularly too hard. My very first class was pre-calculus algebra. That was pretty much a regurgitation of high school algebra, except it didn't include trigonometry. General biology 1 wasn't too bad at all. English writing and inquiry was one of my favorite courses because I actually liked writing and kind of the more literature side of things. And then these two electives here were just electives I had to take to fulfill humanities and social science requirements. So I took World Civilizations 2 and International Relations. By far, in terms of the class that I actually liked the most, it was International Relations. I had the highest grade ever in that class, but because the community colleges don't give you a plus and minus, just a blank letter score, these were the overall grades I had on my transcripts, just plain grades with no plus or minus on them. I think overall my first semester in college wasn't that bad as I thought. I spent a lot less time in the class and much more time outside, which helped me with getting the grades that I wanted. And right off the bat, I got in the dean's list and the president's list for my community college. So that was the first semester. This was the second semester of my undergraduate career. And again, it was still at the same college, Wake Technical Community College. So unlike a four-year college, I transferred directly to a community college right out of high school because I wanted to have some options. And I didn't really apply for any four-year programs because the tuition was much higher. In a community college, it was much, much more cheaper. I saved a lot more money, and I got a lot of refund money based on the Pell Grants I received. So going into the second semester, I took brief calculus, general biology 2, English writing and research in the discipline, and again, a few other required electives, public speaking and music appreciation. So overall, second semester wasn't too bad. I was already getting in the groove and the transition of how the academic flow was at Wake Tech. But I did get my first B in general biology 2. I remember in general biology 2, I was literally a gunner, but I ended up getting a B, which kind of backfired on me because I thought that if I was going to be a gunner in the biology class, I would get a higher score. But quite frankly, it was the exact opposite. Um, so yeah, brief calculus was basically calculus applied for business. So we used a lot of Excel, and we generated graphs and used derivatives, antiderivatives. Think about it as calculus without trigonometry, but it's just applied to the business setting. I really enjoyed my English class, again, we wrote a lot more papers, did more discussions, and I really enjoyed public speaking. And that was kind of one of my favorite classes that entire semester. Music appreciation didn't really enjoy that much, but it was just an easy elective. I kind of got out of the way. So that was most of my spring semester. Going into the summer semester here now, I ended up taking Calculus 1 because this was the point in my undergraduate career where I was really interested in going into computer science. I think I just fell in trap with the over romanticization of the lifestyle of a programmer, and I thought it would be a very easy pathway. But in order to get into computer science, you had to take a bunch of maths and science courses and very hard maths courses. So this is kind of like the start of that pathway to computer science and information technology. Well, that was my very first A minus I got in Calculus 1. And you may notice this was in a different state I took it in, not in North Carolina. This was in Massachusetts Bay Community College. The main reason is I wanted to get an exemption from taking pre-calculus trigonometry and jump straight into Calculus 1. But because Wake Tech did not give me permission, the professor at Massachusetts Bay Community College did allow me to take Calculus 1, bypassing that prerequisite for trigonometry, but she said I had to make sure I was learning trig on my own, which I did, and I kind of relearned a lot of that in Calculus 1. Because I had that brief calculus background from the previous semester, transitioning into Calculus 1 wasn't too bad, and I just ended up getting overall much better grade. I think, although it's an A minus, I learned a lot more in Calculus 1 than I did in brief calculus because brief calculus was an applied calculus course. You were applying that to businesses and companies and spreadsheets and revenue and costs and profit. Calculus 1 was more just pure maths. And this one right here, Fit and Well for Life, was a physical education requirement for college. And I remember I ended up getting a B, but because I did this assignment, it bumped my grade up to an A. But because that was the point in which my transcripts had to be on the letter, I ended up getting a B on my transcript, not an A. So I ended up emailing this professor super crazy about that one assignment and if he can change the grade. He ended up getting back to me a couple weeks later and he said he would. I probably shouldn't have sent him emails every day because it was just going to be a matter of him fixing it in the system rather than me bugging him to get that grade up. Moving on to the autumn semester of 2019, I took Calculus 2 and I got a B, but for the most part, I ended up doing pretty well in the other classes. This was still kind of me going into that computer science move, but then things ended up changing because I realized I didn't want to go into IT. It just wasn't a field for me, and I was really forced into it by both my mom and my dad. And I just ended up taking a few other classes, again, as general education requirements. So this was a social science requirement, and this was a humanities requirement. And then this was the first time I also ended up taking a foreign language. So I chose to take Russian, and I did pretty well in that. I took that at North Carolina State University. The reason why I took it at North Carolina State University was Wake Tech did not offer that course, but NC State did. So I ended up taking it at NC State, but I paid Wake Tech tuition, which was really nice. Moving on to the spring of 2020, this was when things kind of started to get really crazy during COVID. At this point, me and my family moved. That's because my mom got a job at a different hospital, and I didn't want to commute all the way to Wake Tech just to take classes there. So I ended up going to Durham Tech, and the transfer was pretty successful. I took Calculus 3. I didn't need to at this point, but I just felt like it's a math. I really enjoyed calculus overall, and I just wanted to kind of finish that calculus series. Although at this point, I really wasn't going into computer science. So I ended up just getting an A in that, and I did very well. At this point in my career, I also took Java programming, and I got an A. But unlike the previous semester, Java is not on there, and the reason is because I withdrew in Java from my fall of 2019 course. That was the point which I didn't want to take computer science. The reason why I retook Java was just to kind of prove to myself that even though I withdrew from the class, I still wanted to get a fulfillment that I can do it and I can go through that obstacle, which I did. But I still didn't want to go into computer science. At that point, things just were pretty consistent with me going to another profession, which is where at this point I was thinking of going into biology because at that point I really enjoyed kind of more the science aspects and their research. And I thought biology was going to be a good major just right out of the bat because I enjoyed the anatomy and the life sciences. So this is the point where I kind of switched my major to biology, and you'll see later on in the later semesters how my classes reflect that. But I still ended up taking Russian, and I did pretty well in Russian. Chemistry was kind of a hard class, and it's no surprise I ended up getting a B. I think I got a mid B, middle B at 85, 86. Now, going on to the summer of 2020, you can certainly see that drastic change now. So I took General Chemistry 2, which was the sequence of Gen Chem 1, and then I started taking more anatomy and physiology and genetics classes. I ended up taking genetics at Cleveland Community College because the university I was going to transfer into that following semester, UNC Chapel Hill, to finish my biology degree, they actually would give me credit for this course if I took it at a community college. So I ended up taking it there, and overall genetics wasn't too bad. It was really a refresher of general biology 1, which really focused on the molecular and genetic basis of biology, because general biology 2 was more about evolution and more macrobiology stuff, ecosystems, living systems, energy transfers, more of that stuff. And then I took anatomy and physiology 1. I really enjoyed anatomy and the human body. So this was something that I would probably say was my favorite class this entire semester. I really enjoyed the physiological processes of diseases and treatments. And mind you, because this was a summer class, these were all accelerated courses. So I was literally taking 12 credits as a full-time student over the summer, taking these very hard natural science classes. Now we go to UNC Chapel Hill, and you can see how the grading system is a little bit different. It was a very different transition going from a community college where the classes are generally less intense to a 4-year program where you might be in a building with 300 students per one class, and your professor may not even remember you or recognize you. And that's the way I really felt. And because this was during COVID, we couldn't go back in the campuses, and everything was completely online. So it was just me and my room, really the rest of the day for most of the day of the week, taking these classes and doing my assignments. I ended up taking physics and organic chemistry 1 that semester, and as you can see, the grades were pretty much not really the best, but it was still a passing grade. Physics was super hard. It was way harder for me than organic chemistry 1. And then I ended up taking sociology, and I continued my Russian. And this public health class was a course that was labeled as a pass on my transcript, meaning it didn't count towards my GPA, but it did count towards my degree. This was a course that UNC required every student to take during the COVID pandemic. I think it was just because they wanted the students to be aware of public health and the crises that go on. So overall, it was kind of a rude awakening into UNC, coming from a person that I think at that point I had a 3.8 GPA going into my 4-year program in my 3rd year of college. It was a wake-up call, and it wouldn't be a surprise that I was taking a lot of these weed out classes and hard classes here. And then going in the spring of 2021, I would say this was probably the hardest semester for me at UNC, just in terms of grades. I thought that if I took 3 hard STEM classes in the same semester, I would end up doing really good during a time which you're at COVID, you're in lockdown, you're not in the university, and you have no support systems. But boy, was I wrong. So again, I took general physics 2, organic chemistry 2, and analytical chemistry, and you can see the grades were just pretty much not consistent. So the reason why I declared physics and analytical chemistry pass was I was afraid that if I got a low enough grade, it would negatively impact my GPA. So I ended up declaring both of these pass, except organic chemistry, which I thought I had a decent shot in, but again, you can see it was a C plus. And by far, I probably should not have done that to myself, knowing that at UNC, these were classes where which you had hundreds of students, 300 students per class, and there was not the support system there for me to do really well. While in Russian, and again, that special topics in public health class, that required class we had to take, I did pretty well. So kind of lesson learned here is don't bite off more than you can chew, but I certainly did. And I just ended up going through them. It was something that I just had to go through. I didn't feel like dropping out would be a good thing because I wanted to finish at least as strong as I could. Although I may have not been at the top, I just wanted to make sure I got these courses out of the way, which eventually I did. Going into the summer now, things are getting a little bit better, but again, I didn't take these classes at UNC, so you can probably see why the grading systems are a little bit different. So I took biochemistry at Asheville Bucum Technical Community College, and this would actually count towards my biochemistry requirement at UNC for my biology major, and I ended up doing pretty well in that class. It was only a class of 8 or 9 people, and the way we taught each other was just by doing presentations on the stuff we've learned, and all the tests were open book. It really wasn't a hard class, and this class didn't actually come with the lab requirements. We just ended up taking biochemistry lecture based. It was basically biology at the molecular level, with just a little bit of organic chemistry sprinkled into it. And then I took organic chemistry labs 1 and 2 because, unlike in my general chemistry classes, Orgo 1 and 2 and UNC didn't have a lab requirement, whereas in Durham Tech, my general chemistry 1 and 2 classes did have a lab requirement embedded in the class. So I just ended up taking those 1 credit classes at Fayetteville State University. Again, it was kind of a rough awakening with the Orgo 1 lab, but then I kind of got the hang of things in the second lab, so it evened out to about a B overall in the organic chemistry courses. This was going into my last year for my biology major at UNC. So I was just here kind of finishing up the core requirements. I ended up taking cell and developmental biology and neurobiology. As you can imagine, cell and developmental biology was another class of 200-300 students. But this time, this was the very first time actually we were allowed to go back to campus and take our classes in person at UNC, because the last full year of that 2020 year was all online. And then I also wanted to take some math classes because I felt like I really enjoyed maths. So the closest alternative I thought was, hey, I already finished out the calculus series, so why not take statistics? So I ended up taking statistics. I did pretty okay in it in terms of UNC standards. And again, I continued that rush in as expected. Neurobiology was a class in itself, just focused on the neuron and the chemical processes and the cell functions of how the neuron fires. That class actually only had, I think, 20 or 30 students, but it was a graduate level class because I think it was a 400 level class. So just the content was so dense and so deep, it kind of got in the way of me being able to do other things in my other classes. So overall, I don't really feel like I was the best student in biology. I probably wasn't. I was probably one of the worst students in my university, and that really gave me some imposter syndrome of just me thinking, do I even belong here? And these grades are certainly not reflecting it, because I had students that were getting straight A's and studying much less than me. But again, that was just kind of the feeling I had. So this was my last semester of my biology program at UNC. Again, it was just me kind of finishing off the requirements of my major. So I took ecology and evolution. I ended up getting a lower grade. It was the same exact class as cell and developmental biology. It was a class of 200 students ish, and the professors just did a very, very terrible job of giving me an introduction to evolution. And I really struggled in that class. And then you may notice I actually ended up doing a little bit better in some of my core biology classes, particularly in anatomy and physiology. And that's because I really enjoyed those classes, and I was able to take them at a deeper level in UNC. So it was almost, I would say, very close to the anatomy you would be learning in medical school, though it wasn't. But the lab in itself just kind of focused on the anatomical features of the human body, and the lecture focused more on the physiological stuff. And it was a little bit more application based when it came to medicine. So we learned more about disease processes, the medications given to treat patients, and more critical thinking skills. And I really enjoyed this class more than any other class of my science courses at UNC. So I liked my anatomy and physiology classes way better than my orgo, my physics, my analytical chemistry, and my other biology courses. I think it was just because I was the most interested in it. And it was kind of at this point where I really started to maybe look into healthcare and looking into a career path like nursing or even medicine, instead of just going down the science route. Because when I switched into biology, my main goal was to kind of go into science and be a scientist. And it was around this point where when I was at the cusp of getting my biology degree, I went back to school and I was going to start going into nursing school and taking my prereqs there. Which, oh, and just in case I forget, I took Russian here as well. Finish that off. So again, after I received my biology degree in May, I ended up going back and back to Durham Tech because the community college classes were cheaper there. And I ended up taking my prerequisites for nursing school. Again, these were accelerated programs, and I probably should not have taken all these 3 classes at once. But at this point, I was pretty convinced that I was going to go into nursing. And at this point as well, I researched programs into an accelerated nursing school at UNC. So I applied, and I ended up getting into UNC. And the only requirements were that I needed to take these prereqs. So I ended up taking them, and I did pretty okay. And then I was just finishing off those prerequisites going into the autumn as well. So I took pathophysiology and nutrition, again at Durham Tech. These were kind of the gateway courses that gave me a little bit insight into how the biology classes I took would be more geared towards the healthcare perspective than the academic perspective of just the sciences. Going into the spring, I wanted to switch up languages, so I studied Russian pretty well. So then at this point, I just ended up taking German. This grade didn't go on any of my transcripts. I took this class online through a company called Deutsche Academy, and they don't really issue grades. They just issue competencies in your language level. So I just wanted to take it because at this point I already got accepted into UNC's nursing school, but it was not going to start until the summer of 2023. And because I had no other classes I was taking, I just wanted to do something else while I was doing my part-time job. And then as you can see, here are my nursing classes. I made another video on my channel explaining the specific insights on how each of the nursing classes went. So if you want to check that out in more detail, feel free to do so. It's called The Nursing Journey on my channel. But essentially, nursing school is different, and the grading system was actually different. So in my undergraduate curriculum, all the grades were on a 10-point grading scale. So if you scored within the 10 points of something, you would get that letter grade. Now, nursing school had a 7-point grading scale. So you had to basically score a little bit higher just to get a grade that you would be getting pretty high in when it came to undergrad. So that means, for example, if I got a B plus in my nursing skills class, I would have probably gotten an A plus in undergrad. And if I got a B in pathophysiology and pharmacology 1, that'll be closer to an A minus in undergrad. So although these grades may look low for nursing school, they are essentially, I wouldn't say they are curved in a sense. It's a different grading scale. So these are the reflections of that. But again, you can see I took Pathopharm, MedSurg, DEI in nursing, clinical skills, and nursing genomics. Going into that autumn, so you can see a little bit better progress, not a lot of C's. I almost failed out of psychiatry, like I told you, but I ended up getting pretty good. Oh, and the same thing with MedSurg. I almost failed out, but luckily I didn't. And these are the overall grades I've gotten. So a little bit better. With Pathopharm 2, Psych, OB/GYN, Clinical Skills, and Nursing Research. This was the spring, so you can see a little bit more A's in there when it came to the progression of my transition to nursing school. So I took Public Health Nursing Clinical, Pediatric Nursing with Clinicals, MedSurg Nursing, Clinical Nursing Skills 3, and then Healthcare Administration Leadership. So as you can see, the transition is getting a little bit better in terms of the grades. And then when it came to the summer, I pretty much got almost all A's except for clinical nursing skills. And then I got my nursing degree in August, and now I'm a practicing nurse. So that was pretty much my presentation there. Do those grades in itself make me a dumber student? Do they make me not competitive? Or do they not make me smart or competent? I would argue not really. Everybody has their downfalls and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses in particular subjects. For me, a lot of the undergrad courses in UNC, especially those prerequisites for my nursing and medical school, were super hard. And they were purposely made hard that way because a lot of students express interest to go into those fields early on. And the professors just kind of make the curriculum a bit harder for students to get a really good grade in. But overall, I think once I got into my nursing program, the professors were much more concerned about our performance with not just our classes, but they were actually more concerned about our overall satisfaction and feeling with with the content. And they were a little bit more flexible when it came to the courses than in my biology degree. So that kind of shows you the transition of how I started at a community college, transferred to UNC Chapel Hill, changed my mind about my major, took prerequisites, applied to UNC again with a different major, and now I have that major. And now I'm a licensed registered nurse. And now I'm looking into medical school. So it gives you a whole different perspective on how many decisions I have made throughout my whole academic process. So starting off with wanting to go into like computer science, and then going maybe into like more the legal field with my writing skills, then looking into biology as a scientist, and now nursing and medicine. So things change. And I just want to kind of show you that as a reflection of how people change their minds throughout undergrad. When you start off in high school, you want to go into one thing, and then all of a sudden you decide you want to go into something else. So for those who might be struggling out there with grades or who may have improper grades, your grades don't define you for who you are. I have been in so many situations where I felt like I didn't belong at that school. I didn't belong in that class. I was stupid. Something was wrong with me. And if I let those things get to me, I probably wouldn't have been able to make the necessary changes to do better in those classes. And finding out smart strategies to study is really going to help. I've been in so many instances where professors just give me very bad advice on the outdated teaching methods they used that may have helped them, but didn't really help me. So it took a lot of experimentation as well. Anyways, many thanks and cheers.